Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Versasec's webinar. My name is Gabriela Peralta, and I'm here in the marketing team at Versasec. Versasec is an established global leader in identity and access management, providing highly secure, powerful systems for end-to-end credential orchestration. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. However, we will have a dedicated time to answer all the questions at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout our webinar on the question area on the panel below. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on Versasec's YouTube channel for future playback and sharing. Today's webinar is titled Yubico and Versasec, the winning combination for implementing phishing-resistant MFA. Yubico and Versasec are longtime alliance partners and together provide government agencies and enterprises worldwide a winning solution to implement phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Organizations can now reduce time and resources spent on manual management of credentials with implementation of YubiKeys and Versasec Credential Management Systems. In today's webinar, you will learn more about MFA, orchestration, phishing-resistant, FIDO, PIV, and how easily deploy credentials using a credential management system. Our security experts will take you through this journey and bring you insights to provide you the next steps to reach your security and identity goals. Our speakers today are David Maples, Principal Solutions Architect at Yubico, and Michael Samara, Business Development Engineer at Versasec. So let us begin. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Gabby. And thank you all for watching. We really appreciate you spending time with us. We also really appreciate having partners like David and Yubico. It's been fun working with them. They've got a very smart and friendly team. We've worked with Yubico for years, but still, even in this last few months, I've learned something new from David or borrowed from his technical expertise. So it's been a great experience. We share a couple of fun facts with our friends at Yubico. We both are just over 15 years old, and we're both from Sweden. We still have a headquarters in Stockholm, actually. I believe they have some plants over there as well. So from the start, we've been a global company, really focusing on managing security devices like YubiKeys or smart cards. We operate in a number of different verticals. And we go ahead and move on to our next one. As you can see, we operate in a lot of different verticals, whether that's service, technology, government, or so many others. We've got extensive partnerships with the best tech companies in the security space, and our customer retention is industry leading. At Versasec, we only facilitate strong types of MFA, so those considered phishing resistant. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Michael. Hey there. So much like Versasec, Yubico has a lineage dating back to 2007 and starting in Sweden, where our founders, Sina and Jacob Ehrensvard, wanted to take a look at the authentication landscape and do something that shook it up and made strong authentication available to everyone. In 2011, they moved to the Silicon Valley to make sure that we would be in direct communication with the tech giants here to make sure that first, they were following the best practices as we could push them forward. And second, we could learn from them what they needed and their users needed. It must have been successful because we have had a huge growth with the YubiKeys used almost worldwide. And over 19 out of the 20 US tech giants using them for their internal solutions. We can assert that the YubiKey has had a huge impact on those who's used it, leading to zero account takeovers protected with phishing-resistant MFA and the YubiKey, and support reduction of up to 92% versus mobile apps. Since then, we have grown to have over 300 employees scattered across almost a dozen countries, but we still keep our hardware team leading the way in Stockholm to make sure that we are keeping the spirit that the YubiKey was born with alive. But that's enough about Yubico. Next slide, if you would. We're here to talk about phishing resistant authentication and why do people care about this. Next slide, if you would. So long and short of it is, the solutions that have secured your services are strong. Attacks against them are no longer as effective as they were 10, 20, even 5 years ago. So attackers are smart. They're not going after the most strongly defended locations, the most strongly defended services. They're instead looking for the weak links. They're logging in. They're using attacks which they gain legitimate credentials to access accounts and are logging in the front door. So these accounts are also, these types of attacks are also known as phishing attacks because they are literally phishing for people's passwords and legitimate access. So attackers are now going after the weakest links, users. But how are they doing this? Next slide, if you would. So how is phishing successful? Well, it's really about using human nature, tricking the user into giving things over that they shouldn't. The most common form is just asking a user for their password. Anybody who can call you up, and the average user, if they hear a voice of authority, may not think twice about their security standpoint, especially if it sounds like it's coming from an internal site or internal site or service or a team. Alternatively, they can convince the user that they need to re-authenticate. This is quite simple. Everything from calling the user and saying, hey, we need you to authenticate and push we're going to do a test of the mobile push system at such and such a time. Please, when you see the notification pop up, just click yes and use their own attacks at that same time and have the user actually give them the permission to come in. Finally, if a phishable form of second factor authentication is placed, you can convince the user to hand it to you. Anytime that you have the user sit in the middle of a transfer, such as passing an SMS code to an authentication site, it can be captured by a man-in-the-middle attack. Somebody standing up a fake website, somebody looking to capture the data going back and forth, somebody just asking for that over the phone. Users can be tricked. And users shouldn't be tricked. They shouldn't be placed in this position where they have to be security experts as well as do their own job. Next slide, if you would. So how do you achieve phishing resistance? Well, the humans are the weak link, but we shouldn't blame them. Technology should be designed to take the human element out of the equation. So as I said, humans don't necessarily have to be cybersecurity experts on top of the job they're supposed to be doing. Strong authentication methods such as smart cards or FIDO WebAuthn allow for this. They take the user out of the middle and have direct to end-to-end communication for the authentication. And finally, you need to have an architecture that reduces the human element as much as possible. But what is phishing resistant as defined by the industry standards? Next slide. I've talked a lot about it, but does this, what we've discussed, match up to what the industry believes phishing resistance is? The answer is yes. I could read through this paragraph from NIST that defines exactly what phishing resistance is, but let's use plain text for a bit. So first, take the responsibility of identifying attacker off the user's plate. MFA should require something that cannot be given out willy-nilly. That's something that you need to have direct access to, something you either possess or something inherent to you. This could be everything from a biometric fingerprint or a specific authenticator device, such as a YubiKey or a smart card. Finally, you need to use strong authentication methods that take the user out of the equation for passing the confirmation back and forth. Smart cards and WebAuthn both handle everything for authentication without the user's input beyond allowing the credential to happen, such as entering a PIN or other form of identity verification. It's built into the authentication flow. The user is never caught in the middle where they can be exploited to extract that information and allow an attacker to gain access to it. Finally, you need to have an architecture that manages the entire flow with minimizing the user input as much as possible. Everything from issuance to managing the login attempts to end of life for the devices should be removed from the human element as much as possible and built into a solution that handles everything end to end.
Dave, you're making me think of something there, what you just said also, if you don't mind me jumping in real briefly. So one of the things you just mentioned is having that device in knowing when it's in possession. So is that device in your employee's possession already compromised, or do you know where its origins are from? Where did it begin? So the employer may not have adequate control or where the device was built or its administrative components within it. How do you know the device hasn't been tampered with? Well, with Yubico and Versasec, there is a transparency and traceability from when and where the device was built, shipped, received, and registered into our system, then distributed to the end user. So there's one factor eliminated, one risk factor eliminated, right? And the other one that Dave is illustrating and is captured in this NIST publication is dealing with using certificate-based authentication or FIDO for web authentication. So the employer has that employee's credential loaded onto this YubiKey when it's delivered to them. So there's nothing pushed to them. There's no one-time password sent to your mobile phone or sent to a little screen that you need to type in a PIN on time. There's no yes, I agree. There's credentials that live on here and stay here and are only able to be manipulated by an admin with given privileges. So there's nothing to intercept. There's nothing being pushed to the device. The YubiKey is issued with the key or the certs or the permissions to carry out actions, and they live here. So just to further illustrate what Dave was getting at.
Yes, exactly. Having that life cycle being built in place so the user doesn't have to do additional work to make it function is essential to having not just strong authentication, but a frictionless experience that makes users want to use that sort of authentication. And right now, NIST has narrowed the pool of all authentication methods that they consider phishing resistant down to 2 technologies, WebAuthn and FIDO, and smart cards and PIV. But how did we get here? It's been an evolving journey, to be perfectly honest. Back in 2021, the federal government mandated that multi-factor authentication of any sort was a requirement. They wanted to basically not rely on the password anymore, one of the weakest forms of authentication and the easiest to steal and phish. But as that evolved in 2022, they started to refine it. First was looking at a zero trust strategy that requires phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. Zero trust in essence means that there is no trust between services, that every time you want to gain access to a service, you need to perform some form of authentication, strong phishing resistant authentication. And again, the NIST further took a look at it and said the FIDO, WebAuthn FIDO protocol was the only thing that was equivalent to the existing PIV smart cards. And what's more, FIDO is the gold standard for future MFA. Anything that had released after that had to barely meet that. And there is no other technology beyond smart card PIVs that provides that same level of phishing resistance and strong authentication. As 2022 carried on, the expansion of phishing resistant multi-factor authentication spread throughout the government. Playbooks were put out to make sure that identity was tied strongly to phishing resistant authentication hardware, such as a YubiKey or a smart card. And agencies were mandated to plan to how they were going to comply with that. As it moved into the second half, this even went beyond internal government entities and DoD to tangential ones, such as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and software vendors that were selling to internal government customers needed to show that their security could match those requirements. Finally, at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, NIST finally put together and defined explicitly what they meant by phishing-resistant authentication and limited it just to WebAuthn and FIDO and PIV smart cards. Those MFA push apps, those SMS codes, anything that had a human in the middle of the authentication was no longer allowed. So what does this have to do with the YubiKeys and how do they work? Next slide, if you would. So I've talked a lot about phishing resistant authentication, but how does this have to deal with the YubiKey product? Well, first, let me talk about the YubiKey a little bit. As mentioned, you want to know where your authentication comes from to make sure that you can trust it. All YubiKeys are made in the US and Sweden under very strict controls to ensure that they are not tampered with in production, that you can trust the devices coming off the line are not going to be suspects, for lack of a better term. We wanted to make them not just secure, but easy to use. They have a number of different form factors to allow it to be plugged into a wide range of devices. Everything from your standard USB-A connections to the new USB-C, Lightning for iOS. And we wanted to make sure that we could solve all the solutions necessary as well. NFC for mobile, sorry. So wireless near field communication for your mobile platforms such as Android or iOS. Finally, we wanted to make sure that we could meet the use cases. We have full-sized keychain-based devices to allow users to easily move them from machine to machine, environment to environment, or simply keep them on their keychain and carry them with them. And we have tiny ones that fit inside a specific device and are designed to move with that device itself and perform a strong authentication to a secured endpoint. But, strong authentication is great, but doesn't matter if the device itself breaks. We have designed the YubiKeys to resist all forms of common accidents and attacks, physical attacks. They are very crush resistant. In fact, most of the YubiKey users report that if they get in a fight with their YubiKey and their laptop, the laptop's USB port will break first. Not that that's a good thing, but at least you're not going to, say, drop your smartphone and lock yourself out of all of your accounts when it stops working. Further, YubiKeys are waterproof. We have had testing where we have frozen them in a block of ice for up to a month, broken them out, and still have them work. We have had them submerged in salt water for 3 months, pull it out, have it still work. And what's more, I'm using antidote. We've had one that actually has traveled through a dog and comes out and still work. The only thing we don't recommend is tossing them into your fireplace. Please don't do that. So that's the physical aspects of the YubiKey, but you also want to know what it can do for your authentication. Next slide, if you would, please. So YubiKeys support multiple authentication methods simultaneously on the same device, a single hardware device that can support everything that you need. PIV Smart Card, WebAuthn, all at the same time. It allows you to basically have a solution that allows you to pull the correct and best authentication method for your needs at that time or for that service, but have everything in a single centralized device to your users. No juggling badges and phones and authentication tokens. No, it's just one device that can do everything, especially when paired with a partner like Versasec that can unlock all the functions of the YubiKey and tie them to an authentication framework. And for that, I'd like to invite my colleague Michael to discuss more about the Versasec solution.
Thanks again, Dave. It's really, I love your explanations of things. It's really easy to just digest. So yeah, so now next slide, please. We know that YubiKeys help get rid of passwords and they help prevent cyber attacks. So this is a big part of the question or the solution, right? So now imagine what it's like for an organization to get or to manage hundreds of these things, or even better, hundreds of thousands, which legitimately is happening concurrently around, in different deployments around the world. So how do you get that many users and YubiKeys into a system and then deploy them either remotely, remote offices, remote employees around the world, or in large batches, large groups of employees centrally being deployed at the same time? How do you make sure no one unauthorized can manage those YubiKeys? I mean, let's think about this. Maintaining databases or repositories of information manually, it sounds terrible and risky. Tracking which credentials or YubiKeys or certificates are about to expire, doing that manually is a scary thought. Worrying about some of the home-built or strung together other solutions that you're trying to maintain a PKI environment or a PIV environment to keep you compliant, and wiring things together kind of in a haphazard manner, it's not comforting. And maybe not compliant. So those are just some of the reasons why Versasec comes into play. Next slide, please. So life with Versasec, it's a lot easier to understand the direction you need to go in, right? So we've heard stories about the difficulty of managing user credentials. I've seen it coming in regularly, and without the system, how it's time consuming and an error prone process. Well, with Versasec coordinating these processes for you, you can save time, your consumer trust, money, but also think about it, the fewer errors you make could be the difference of better protecting your sensitive Department of Defense information, laboratory information, or other sensitive information is what's on the line potentially, right? So Versasec makes updating and maintaining user identity information throughout the life cycles streamlined and easy. CMS makes sure the connected systems are automatically kept updated and aware of the status of each one of these YubiKeys or each one of these credentials. Next slide, please. So how does this all come together? There's no reason to have the risk and headache of trying this manually. Versasec orchestrates these efforts very easily by connecting or communicating with some of these different ecosystems or technologies you can see here. So here's a visual representation of some of the types of systems that go into building a phishing-resistant environment. We're kind of the center hub, if you will, that you can connect your user directories, certificate authority, notification systems that will feed repositories and databases, all effortlessly managed throughout the life cycle of the device. So the CMS allows for automation of tasks and provides traceability into many different types of events that occur. So let's look just at the image here. You can see some of the possible connections we make to build a system. So if you'd like to implement like a PIV PKI environment, you might start with a user directory. And then let's say we need to go over to our certificate authority as well. We're obviously going to need our YubiKeys plugged in there. And then let's see, we have our HSM that needs to manage the master key, which manipulates the admin keys on the YubiKeys. So there's a few connections going on just to implement a PKI environment, right? If we want to add FIDO to that, we're going to look at connecting to an IDP additionally. So registering websites to an identity provider that lets your employees visit sites in a very safe manner. They've been vetted by you or by the IDP. So we haven't talked about this much, but physical access, even if you need to add physical access to a location or a facility, how do you do that? You might need a card printer that can encode these devices. You will need some type of photo imaging service. You will need a physical access system that actually can read the NFC talking to it and then share information with the CMS. So there's different ways to build systems. We have customers doing all of the above, sometimes all together, and we make these connections easy.
I'd like to add to that, if you don't mind, Michael. With a partner like Versasec, you're able to take the strong authentication method. I mentioned the PIV or the FIDO, and not just apply it to single devices, but make it available across your entire ecosystem that's connected to the Versasec app, extending that strong phishing-resistant authentication to solutions that may not support it natively, bringing the entire environment up to parity and allowing it to be the best authentication that you can offer.
Thanks, Dave. Much appreciated. And next slide, please. So we've talked about the importance of the credential management system and how it connects to different environments and ecosystems like Dave was sharing with us. Well, we want to make sure that we offer you the possibility to choose the best security providers for your business. So you have access to deploy your credentials with market leaders that are the best in their respective areas in the industry. So as an example, you can see we work with a lot of certificate authorities. We work with different IDPs, different physical access systems, and you can see Yubico in there as well as somebody you can choose to enable your system with. We want you to be able to choose to the best in the best of the industry to work with. So we have a robust portfolio, and Yubico is a chosen partner there. Next, please. So there's different ways to deploy a CMS. You can do it centrally or deploy these YubiKeys to your end users. So how do you get them to the end user? Is it operator assisted kind of centrally, or are you putting some of the empowerment to the employee? So our admin applications make creating or implementing policy and workflows really easy. Day-to-day smart card functionality, so certificate rotation and pin stuff can be done here as well. But our admin app is really the brains of the system, and where the backend is manipulated. So different roles are configured for fine-grained access control for different privileging. Day-to-day YubiKey management is done through our very kind of the day-to-day smart card management, where you don't have to worry about policy and all that. You're just looking to unblock these things, rotate certificates on them and so forth, is done through a really lightweight, super intuitive desktop app for managers and maybe help desks that require very little training, easy to use. And we got to think about another real scenario though. So in today's world, remote issuance is a must. In other words, employees doing it themselves. So employees are often working remotely, or IT departments are looking for the most efficient way to deploy, whether it's in person with somebody or remotely. Versasec empowers the end users to manage the YubiKeys themselves. User application I was just referring to can be pre-configured so that employees can do everything from issuing their own YubiKey blank from scratch the first time they plug it in, or the opposite, and just be very limited and have the ability to unblock their PIN or change their PIN. You can configure the CMS to either end of that responsibility spectrum. Next, please. So we've talked about some of the capable connections and a little bit of the backend and some of its capabilities, but now I just want to show you how easy it is to use. This is just a very intuitive diagram that's built into some of our into the management applications. So very simple to use, but very powerful and secure behind the scenes. So in one dashboard, using a diagram just like this, you can issue or revoke PIV, PKI, FIDO, or even those RFID only devices. So even if you're loading certificates and other key pairs, multiple certificates, multiple key pairs on this Yubico, one foul swoop, you can revoke those privileges, and all other systems are notified and communicated with. So this is an actual diagram that would be used. Very easy to use, really intuitive, very minimal training required. Next, please. So this is a quick look at a very common use case for customers. You can see that this is a smart card logon, or you might be familiar with this screen. It's your desktop logon. So here they have forced smart card login. So this is where an employee is asked to plug in their YubiKey and enter a PIN or do some type of biometric. This is authenticating them into the organization's domain, so getting into their system. On this screen, you can see it's a little bit small, but we've added extra smart card management capabilities. So they could rotate certificates on this YubiKey. They could issue this from scratch, like I was alluding to earlier, if it's blank. They can do other PIN management, self-service type of functionality built in. This can be tailored in different ways, so you can give them more privileges or pull back on the amount of privilege you want them to be able to access from this logon screen. So this is this, along with our simple, easy to use desktop app for employees, allows the company to shift power to the employees if you want to do so. Back over to you, Dave. Actually, I think
I believe the next slide's your demo, correct?
I think we're gonna try to launch our demo real quickly. Little technical difficulties. Okay, guys, so this is a quick demonstration of a central issuance. So we have an operator sitting with an end user. The operator's plugged in a blank YubiKey for that employee, and we're going to go through the steps. So we're going to issue both PIV credentials and FIDO credentials to this device at the same time. So we're going to get in. We're going to find the new employer, the employee we want to issue to in the user directory. So we're finding them here. This is what this looks like. We're going to go through the processes, and we're going to start to align that employee with certain privileges. Here, we're going to add a key pair to the device or to our YubiKey so that they can do web authentication. In a second, you're going to see, and this is moving a little quickly, so bear with me. It's all happening at the same time, actually, or one following the other immediately. adding certificates to the device now. So with this one's drag and drop of the mouse, they have issued both PKI or PIP credentials along with FIDO. We're now going over to the user application. The user is at home. They're activating their token. So this could be an example of it's been mailed to the employee as well. They receive it at home with a blocked PIN maybe. They use this intuitive user application to unblock their device. Change their PIN is basically what's happening. And then their token or YubiKey is active. Now we have a active YubiKey. We're going to take it and use our daily active desktop login. So this is a forced YubiKey or smart card login on our desktop. So here we had to put in our YubiKey and authenticate with a PIN. That was our PIV authentication into our domain. Now we are in our workstation. We want to authenticate into web services, or we want to visit some different websites. So now we need to authenticate into our IDP. Again, with one swoop, we have our YubiKey in there, and we need to touch it, essentially, verifying that we are here. So we're not needing to remember extra things other than this thing is plugged in and we need to touch it to say we are a human being. And with that, we're brought into our vetted website, Salesforce in this case, that we've been given permission to visit every day. So thanks. Quick technical difficulty, but I think we made it through. Now back over to you, I promise.
So thank you, Michael. You can never get away from demoitis, no matter how much you try. So one of the big challenges that the YubiKey has faced is the fact that it is hardware. And most of the solutions out there are based around the software licensing model. To address this, Yubico has rolled out our Yubi Enterprise subscription service, where we try to extend the software license experience to a hardware product. Basically, it allows you to purchase a set of YubiKeys, but pay for them over a 3-year subscription term, allowing you to have your inventory on hand, but not necessarily in your office, and have them refreshed on a yearly basis. This allows for a number of helpful things, such as allowing you to roll out and new YubiKeys every year as your your organization grows, as you have just turnover from employees leaving or losing their YubiKeys, or otherwise refreshing your stock without having to make that purchase every year. What's more, we try to make this helpful for the users and not lock them out of enhancements to, say, firmware updates, new firmware or other product enhancements by allowing you to trade up to 25% of your YubiKeys per year as no-cost upgrades for replacements, allowing you to still remain at the forefront of the offerings, regardless of when you purchase your subscription. You know, we can also offer additional backup YubiKeys at a discounted price should you wish to pursue that, or extended warranty and, of course, extended technical support. This applies to all the YubiKey product line, everything from the small form factors that sit inside your computer to the full keychain sized one, and can be done at the customer's discretion how they wish to divvy up their particular order. Next slide, if you would. That's only half the problem that we're trying to solve. We also want to make sure that, much like with a software, you can stand up a license and get a user running relatively quickly. We want to have that same experience with shipping YubiKeys. The other half is the Yubi Enterprise Delivery Console that allows you to track your inventory from your subscription that's held by Yubico. You can order in bulk and deliver YubiKeys to users on demand, either as a bulk purchase to, say, your headquarters if you wish to issue them directly to users, or as individuals to end users as needed. You can ship and track the information as the YubiKey is sent out by Yubico, ensuring that you don't have to take on additional logistics overhead in order to make this effective. And you can build it into a console or API access, either accessing it directly through a web console for direct admin, or tying it into a more organized extensive framework, such as ServiceNow for spokes and whatnot. This is great because it allows you to essentially treat the YubiKey hardware as you would a software license. Just as you stand up somebody by sending them a license key or otherwise enabling them, you can build sending them a YubiKey into part of that process without having to jump through additional hoops.
Dave, I'd love to tag on real quickly if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
We have customers working with you guys right now, and they really like this service and see a lot of value in it. So what he's referring to, the inventory management, shipment and tracking and so forth, gives you complete transparency and control over your inventory from when it's made, where it's made, and to when it's issued to the end user. So really important to organizations with sensitive information, right? The other part of this was that we talked about briefly earlier, but how do you get, as an example, 10,000 users into a system? So Versasec with Yubico does have a way to ingest a stock of YubiKeys and align them with users without ever losing control of the state of the device. So we can then control it throughout its life cycle, preventing unauthorized changes and maintaining awareness of the state of the device. So ingesting a large file is how you get your tens of thousands of users in there.
Yes, and the greatest thing is with Versasec, the end user doesn't have to worry about that. All they know is they get a YubiKey. As it was shown, they plug it in, they tap it, enter their PIN, and away they go. It's almost frictionless for them. But that's the Yubico side. The other half is really the Versasec and how they can provide the correct solution, the best solution for your particular needs. Michael, would you like to go into that a little bit more?
Next slide, please. Yep, so there are multiple ways and environments that you can deploy it. So we've been talking about making things simpler for organizations, and that's often desired, right? So if you like the idea of our cloud team keeping you up to date with current releases, performing server maintenance, handling backups, incident handling, and things like that, we offer this system as a service, and that oftentimes does make sense. It may save your organization resources, time, and financial resources, but also we're the absolute experts in this and are building the software on a continuous basis, making new releases. So having the experts do it for you sometimes makes sense, right? There is then absolutely the other end of the spectrum, and we're doing a lot of this with Dave and YubiKeys also right now, where it may be a very restricted environment. So air-gapped, private, no outside communication. There's a lot of lab environments and other enclaves and government organizations that require this type of restrictive environment. So you need your server here locally, physically around you, and they want to keep an eye on it. So we do these types of projects as well, and we can handle anything in between. And with that, yeah, next, please. We just wanted to say thank you guys for joining us today. Huge thanks to David and Yubico for joining us and being such great partners. It's always enjoyable working with you all. At the end of the day, we really want you to take the idea away that implementing a phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication environment with Versasec and Yubico is a fast implementation, cost-effective, very scalable, and we're happy to discuss that journey with you. So I think we're going to close it out now.
Yes, thank you, David and Michael. Now we will start our audience Q&A portion of our webinar. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to continue to submit them. If we do not get to them during our live webinar now, we will follow through with an email. So feel free to keep sending your questions. And thank you to all of those who have sent questions. I see here that we have quite a few, so that's great. So I'm just going to read off the first question, and then Michael and David, you guys can just jump in as you see fit if you want to answer that question. Okay, so our first question today is, are there bulk or pre-enrollment options for YubiKeys with Versasec solutions?
Abby, I'll grab that one just because I was kind of tailing off with it when we finished. And I'll just reiterate, it is a really desirable aspect of doing business with Yubico and Versasec that you can do this. So we have several engagements right now where there's thousands of employees and they're distributing these thousands of YubiKeys amongst their employee group, and they need to align them with their employees. Can you do that with like one fell swoop, or do you have to do it manually each time with it, register it to a specific person, The answer is we do this in bulk enrollment. Absolutely. Pre-enrollment, bulk enrollment. We call it card stock management. So you're in control of your YubiKey stock. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if I can just interject, Michael, as part of the Yubico delivery process, we can work with entities like Versasec to automate this process as much as possible. We can't quite do the shipping a pre-enrolled device to an end user quite yet, but with the Versasec solution, that's not a problem.
All right. Our second question is, we want to use the YubiKeys also on mobile phones. What is needed?
So I'll take that, Michael, if you don't mind. One of the great things about the Versasec solution is because it is web-based, the experience for the solution itself is the same regardless of if you're on a desktop, laptop, or mobile device. And further, the YubiKey allows you to use the same experience on your mobile device as you would with a full-size device hardware. The YubiKey allows you to have, I can't even, can you guys see it? Nope. It won't let me show you, but I'm holding up a YubiKey with a USB-C port that will connect to most Android and latest generation iOS devices, so you can connect it directly for any authentication, as well as tap it using the NFC communication to allow for the authentication to pass wirelessly to your mobile device. Further, Yubico also has a YubiKey that can connect over the Lightning port for iOS devices that don't support USB-C yet, allowing you to have the same experience regardless of the if you're connecting it to a iOS device or a Android device or your USB-C on your laptop.
Yeah, so it's really just a matter of using the CMS to load a certificate onto your YubiKey, which I think you can kind of see. Tapping it NFC, and you have your mobile web application authentication. That's it.
All right. I want to use CBA certificate-based authentication on Azure AD. Is this possible as well?
Sure. Yeah, we keep adding to our Azure Active Directory integration. There's a lot of capabilities there. So using certificate-based authentication with Azure Active Directory, yes, absolutely possible. And it's simple to set up. So in that scenario, you would upload your certificate authority certificate to Azure Active Directory and have it act as the root of trust. And then you select the mapping you want between Azure Active Directory users and the certificates with their YubiKeys. Very simply put, but we can go over that if you have other questions after.
All right. What happens if I lose my YubiKey and I'm traveling or I'm remote?
I'll take that one if you don't mind, Michael. Ideally, you have a backup YubiKey that you've kept in your pocket or other secure location in your luggage or on your person, so you're never locked out. But we know that's not always the case. There's a number of different options there, and really the one that works the best is the one that meets your situation. You can have a YubiKey drop shipped to you quite quickly, either blank or pre-provisioned, and allow you to gain access through a secure manner if you absolutely need to have that level of security. Alternatively, you can purchase a blank YubiKey or have one shipped to you directly. And as Michael demonstrated, you can have that enrolled through your lock screen on your device, allowing you to gain that access again with a strong authentication. Finally, Versasec does allow for the bypass of multi-factor authentication in very specific circumstances if the situation warranted. Sometimes that needs to be the case. Most of the time, you probably don't want to compromise your security for ease of use, but it is an option to allow somebody to get that drop-dead must-have access immediately. The key thing to note is regardless of which path you take, it really depends on what your security footprint and what the risks that your end company is willing to evaluate for your particular situation. Having that choice that's offered by the Yubico and Versasec allows you to pick the right option for your specific circumstances, rather than going with a one-size-fits-none solution.
Can one YubiKey work in multiple environments?
I'll grab that one, Dave. Yeah, it certainly can. So even right now, as an example, we have a customer that, a mutual customer, it's a project we're both involved in, that is has a large corporate environment, and then they also have a smaller, very restricted environment. And those folks that are in the restricted environment are also part of the corporate environment. So they have two domains they need access to, right? So they probably need a CMS for each. However, you can issue certificates from one domain to the YubiKey. You can then issue a certificate from that other domain to that same YubiKey, and authentication into those domains will work. There's some restriction as far as when you're in one domain, can you do PIN manipulation and unblocks and things like that? That might be a factor, but other than that, outside of those, yeah, adding multiple certificates for different domains or different environments is absolutely doable. Yeah.
Okay, we are arriving towards the end of our webinar, so we will probably just take 2 more questions. Can this work with PIV? Have we talked about derived?
So what you're referring to is probably derived PIV credentials. So first, yes, the YubiKey does work as a PIV compatible, PIV compliant smart card. That is to say, all the interactions with a standard PIV smart card are done exactly the same on a YubiKey. There's no function that it does not support. The only reason that it is not a actual replacement for a PIV smart card yet is because it is not big enough to put someone's actual picture on. We're working on that. We're working on that. Maybe you might need a microscope in the future, but we're working on that. But underneath the hood, when you're actually doing the authentication, it can do everything and is trusted the same as a PIV or CAC card, allowing you to have that strong authentication. What's more, the YubiKey is one of the few form factors beyond the standard smart card that has been evaluated and approved to hold a credential that was issued on the strength of your CAC card's credential, allowing you to use the YubiKey as a second form of authentication, another with the same level of trust as your actual smart card itself. A lot of government agencies really love the fact that they can have their physical access tied to their badge, where they have to flash it to the individuals at the gate to let them in. But then when they sit down at their office, they can plug their YubiKey into their laptop and perform the same strong authentication without having to have their lanyard tied to a physical device. It gets a little awkward.
It's kind of a neat thing. I'll just jump in there for a second. Just to what Dave is mentioning is kind of neat, because yeah, folks are taking it from more of like a traditional card looking form factor with the chip in it and deriving, making kind of like making a copy of that certificate in that card's chip, deriving it onto your YubiKey. And they do it for different reasons. This might be a backup to their original. This might have other technology in it that this does not offer as well. It just varies. It's the same chip, different body, right? So there's reasons to use these.
All right, and is this solution certified to work in federal environments?
So I'll take the lead on that one. The YubiKey is. Yubico offers a FIPS certified line of YubiKey devices that are identical to the same form factors as we've seen with the mainline YubiKeys. All the same form factors, all the same hardware, but has gone through the FIPS accreditation process and is allowed to be used in environments securing up to Authentication Assurance Level 3, the highest possible authentication assurance level right now. This means that in a federal environment, in anything that has any sort of FIPS compliance, the YubiKey FIPS line can be used, and functionally, it behaves the same as the standard YubiKey.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael and David, for this great informational session. And of course, everyone who joined us virtually. Today's webinar will be available on our YouTube channel for future playback and sharing with colleagues. Thank you for spending this time with us. We look forward to connecting with you. Feel free to send us an email, connect with us through our websites, and of course, on social media. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you.